So good evening. My name is Adam. Some of you might know me already. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the rail industry, and my plan is to give you a bit of an introduction to what it's like to work as a software developer or software engineer, and then see if I can cover some more stories and post-mortems of times where things haven't quite gone to plan. So here's a rough outline of what I'm going to try and cover today. And it's a lightning talk. It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the fundamentals before I start going into some stories from the trenches. But first, a bit about me, my interests and my experience. So right now, day to day, I work in the world of software engineering as a contractor. Most of my work nowadays is in the rail industry, so ticket retailing, seat reservations, fares, that sort of thing. I've worked for clients who build systems to retail tickets on the back end, provide front-end retail websites, and I've worked with clients who do journey planning as well. And for those of you wondering, yes, I also spend a few days a week working at the University of Warwick itself in IDG, which is the new IT services. So if you've booked an on-campus COVID test, or maybe you've collected a parcel on campus from the post room, you've probably interacted with code that I've written. So with all of that out of the way, how do we sell a train ticket online? So here's a super high-level list of a few things that you probably need to get started. So you're going to need a front end or some sort of website that your users will interact with in order to complete their purchase. I've mentioned accreditation here. So all ticket issuing systems have to be quality checked by Rail Delivery Group. And in the UK, Rail Delivery Group are the leadership body for rail. And they work, they're sort of brought together as a collective of train operators. So companies like Avanti West Coast, GWR, Cross Country, etc., and Network Rail, together they are Rail Delivery Group. And so they are the ones that do the checking to ensure that ticket issuing systems work as they should. You'll need something called a journey planner to help come up with itineraries for your customers' journeys. I'll cover these in a little bit more detail shortly. And you'll also need to write quite a bit of code to interact with a variety of industry systems. And you'll need to do stuff like write sales data, generate e-tickets in PDF form, or I don't know, for Google Pay, Apple Wallet. You might want to make seat reservations. There are a whole host of industry systems that you need to talk to sell a ticket and ensure that your customer can travel on the UK rail network. Accreditation, as I briefly mentioned, is a must-have before you can sell any live tickets on the actual railway. They want to make sure that you're not going to break existing systems and that you've actually implemented your system properly so you're not mis-selling tickets. And of course, money to fund all of this work, to pay for the accreditation, is pretty important too. So let's talk a little bit about journey planning. What is journey planning? Why does it matter? Well, not every journey is going to involve one simple direct train. I can't get from Kenilworth to Birmingham without changing onto another service, and that might be at Coventry or Leamington Spa. So I'll take my West Midlands Railway service from Kenilworth to Coventry, and then I'll change there onto a cross-country service to get to Birmingham New Street. So you need to work out where I should change as a passenger. And there are often different priorities here. So do you want to minimize the journey distance, the journey time, the cost of the journey? Do you want to minimize the number of changes? Are you okay with some sort of trade-off between all of these different factors? And if so, which one should you weight the most important? Should they all have equal weight? Should you consider cost above time? There's a whole host of things to try and consider there. You also need to check that the services that you've suggested to the customer are actually bookable and that you can sell valid tickets to cover the journey. And not all journeys from a station A to a station B will necessarily even have a fare defined. It's entirely possible for station A to station B to require more than one ticket and for there to just not be a fare. If your service needs reservations, so for example, on the East Coast Main Line, if you want to travel from King's Cross to York on LNER, you need a reservation. You cannot go on that service without one. And so if you're doing a journey plan that looks at the timetable and suggests a journey with that operator, you need to make sure that there are still sufficient seats free on that service for your passengers. Otherwise, you're kind of suggesting something that they're never going to be able to travel on. And you can see how this can get more complicated. Some journey planners let you customize via points, so you can force a journey to go via some station or avoid a station or change the connection times. Each station also has something called a minimum connection time. So Birmingham New Street is quite a big station. It's got lots of platforms. I think the minimum connection time is something like 12 minutes there. And so if you're changing there, you need to be given that amount of time on the assumption that you could have to go from platform 10 to platform 1, and it might take you a while. So on the left-hand side, you can see a screenshot of a example sort of journey plan generated by a journey planner. Ticket retail websites like the Trainline or one of the operator websites will do all of this for you when you type in your journey details, and they all tend to be implemented slightly differently, so they'll prioritize different things. But at the end of the day, they're giving you a plan, considering where you need to change and telling you when you'll arrive at your destination. So I'm not really going to talk about some of the algorithms that you can use to implement a journey planner, but if you are interested, I've got a bunch of resources here, and we'll get them cost-posted to Discord after the end of the talk, and you can have a look. There is a paper on the archive about what we call the connection scan algorithm, which is quite a common sort of approach taken, and Trainline used it, as did Certis when they were writing their journey planners. Linus Norton is quite good in the rail space. He's written a lot of blog posts and published some videos to sort of demystify a lot of this. I think there's generally in the rail industry a sort of, I don't want to say attitude against outsiders, but a lot of this stuff doesn't get discussed in the open, which is a bit of a shame because there's some quite interesting problems to consider. So I briefly mentioned that you need to have a set of tickets to cover the route that your journey planner has suggested. So you might well be thinking, well, what route does a rail ticket actually let you travel via? Or maybe you've never even had cause to think about this in detail before. So the actual answer to this question is surprisingly complicated. There are some easy rules to remember. So the shortest distance route from station A to station B, that will always be valid. You can always travel that way with your ticket. If there's a direct through train that goes from station A to station B, well, it's entirely valid for you to travel on that service too. But the space in between is where it gets much more complicated. And to answer the question, you need to use something called the routing guide. So the routing guide gives you the information and logic that you need to be able to work out valid routes between specific stations. And it's an incredibly involved process. It's not really been modernized with time. So for example, part of the algorithm involves checking historical prices from 1996, which becomes very interesting for stations which didn't exist back in 1996. And they've had to hack around that a little bit as well. So Kenilworth, is an interesting one. If you're interested in the nitty-gritty details of how this stuff works, I've got some links on the previous slide to some of the openly available data and some resources for understanding it. I'm not going to go into it now. You can see on this slide, this is what we call the yellow pages. And there's a few thousand pages of basically pairs of permitted routes for different routing points to get from A to B. And the journey planner systems will sort of interrogate this data to work out valid routes. So moving on with journey planning out of the way, I'm going to briefly cover some of the systems that you might need to interact with to actually sell tickets. So for keeping track of sales, the rail industry has a system called Lennon. It stands for Latest Earnings Networked Nationally Overnight. If you hadn't noticed, rail really likes acronyms, so this is just one of many. And Lennon accepts what we call SCCI files in the rail industry, SCCI plus, rather. So the actual format for all of this isn't very interesting, but the way in which the system works, which Lennon works, is bizarre and somewhat antiquated. So it's modeled after a physical ticket office. So bookings are made on printing machines at specific windows inside a ticket office during a work shift. So it's basically meant for people who turn up to work in their physical ticket office and sell stuff during the shift that they're, booked on to work, and that then gets reconciled. But the systems, haven't really adapted to the idea of selling tickets over the internet. So we still have to work with these sort of physically based models with our computer systems. So our computer systems will turn up for a work shift that might last 6 hours, and then we might have a cron job that completes the shift and sends the data on. It's all nonsense, but this is what you have to do to work with the systems that exist. And there are other systems for keeping track of seat reservations, so what we call NRS, the National Reservation System, and even more systems for determining who can sell what sort of ticket. And we've got something called RCS, or the Retail Control Service, which tells us who can sell what. So moving on, yes, the systems aren't the nicest to work with. I've mentioned Lennon model, but also a lot of it's XML as well. So we've got these horrible XML elements that don't really have descriptive attributes on them, and you have to sort of refer back to your big long PDFs to understand what's going on. Much of this hasn't really been reimagined from the ground up for the 21st century, but we put up with it. And of course, data is often pushed to retailers or other industry protocols like FTP, because there is no better alternative in 2021. So a few final points to take away from all of this. Train operating companies are in control of their own data within industry systems. So that's organisations like Avanti, LNER, country. They maintain their pricing data, their retail control data. And there's not really an independent organisation that oversees any of this or ensures data quality. Effectively, that industry leadership body is RDG itself, which is just made up of the train operating companies. So there's no independent regulator or anything like that. And in my personal opinion, this leads to a situation where there's not really enough incentives for TOCs to get the data right. So that leads on to me talking a little bit go wrong when you're selling train tickets. So this is a fun one. This happened fairly recently. We noticed that a ticket has been marked as retailable in the retail control service data, and it's incredibly good value, like really good value. 10p for first class for a 4.5-hour journey. You can see in the screenshot, it goes from King's Cross to Edinburgh for 10p. One of the clients I work with had started to sell these tickets. And now, the upstream data says we can, so the system was working entirely as it should. Clearly, a mistake had been made with this particular ticket. It shouldn't have been marked as retailable, but it was. And so multiple customers are very happy about this. They start with the whole family, 4 or 5 people going up from London to Edinburgh, 50p, not bad at all, in full first class with catering, drinks and food. But yeah, it's an incident that we have to respond to. It's a part, and so my argument is that the right thing to do is to, I suppose, consider the intentions and try to work around the difficulties that might ensue for customers who do try and travel on these tickets and refund them and cancel them. Now, of course, it might well be too late. If the customer's already purchased the tickets and printed them straight away, then there's not really anything we can do. We can't cancel a printed credit card size ticket. There's nothing we can do there. But you try and clean up as best as you can. And it's always good to know this wasn't just the clients that I work with either, so other companies were affected by this too. So here is a forum post from some people who spotted a train operating company who had a website that is also selling some 5p or 10p tickets. Of course, you cannot see which train operating company is mentioned in this forum post because it would be bad of me to post that in this talk. But yeah, it wasn't just us. So here's another one. This was even more recently that this happened. A train operating company which operates in the north of the UK decided they wanted to introduce a new promotion, and it was going to be implemented as a type of rail card because rail cards already exist. There's already systems for storing rail cards, and it was designed to work on their own fares up in the north of the UK. And for reasons that are still very much unclear to me, the rail card on seemingly every single flexible ticket across the entire rail network, and gave every customer who used this rail card a hefty 50% off every single ticket that they look for. And so, nightly update, our systems see new rail card, offer it in the drop-down list because it's there. And yeah, that was a bit unfortunate. Luckily, we spotted this one reasonably quickly, and we were able to take some measures to prevent use of this rail card. But again, upstream data, the rail card shouldn't have been valid for those other flows, and yeah, it affected more than one retailer again. So a bit more of an ongoing issue for me has been trying to deliver a high quality seat picker. So the idea is that you want to travel from, I don't know, London to Birmingham or London to York or something. And so you want to have a nice seat map that you can look at the coaches inside the train and pick your seat. And efforts on this sort of project have been hampered by a wide variety of issues. So we've got seats that aren't even aligned properly, they're all over the place. Poor quality coach diagrams here. We don't even have illustrations of tables or seats really, it's just a bunch of rectangles and some text. This is a raster image. So if you have a visual impairment or you need to use a screen reader, well, screw you, because there's nothing inside that image that you can access that tells you where stuff is inside that coach. You've just got to, I guess, guess what's there. And it can be a real challenge to work with a lot of this data. It's frustrating. Of course, yeah. Some seats we even had outside a seat map, and it would be almost as if the seats were sort of on the track, completely outside the carriage. So yeah, that was fun. So for us, a lot of this has been working around this data. So we try and use explicit allow lists of known good tickets. If a new ticket comes along, then it shouldn't be added to the list until we're sure that it's meant to be sold. And same for rail cards. We have a allow list of rail cards that this gets reviewed, and we make sure that we're not really selling tickets for new rail cards until we're sure that they're defined properly. You shouldn't have to do any of this, but it's what you have to do. Some more technical outages. So a couple of these, completely my fault as well. So a few weeks ago, I released an Android app for a client, and it involved a database change, and the database migration that I set up did not quite work properly. So it worked if you had a fresh copy of the app installed, but if you're upgrading from a previous version with an older version of the database to the latest version of the app, then it would crash on startup. So every single person who updated the app couldn't use it anymore, which led to a few negative reviews. So that was a fun one to sort out. Managed to get an update for that one released fairly quickly. We've had some issues on the website with a new website. We put it into use and tried to send traffic at it, and very quickly realised that the Postgres instance doesn't really have enough concurrent connections that it supports to deal with the traffic. So that was a quick revert back to the old version and a bit of a rethink as to our architecture there. Yesterday evening was a very good example. I was up in Manchester heading to the pub with some colleagues and other rail industry people, and there was a Google Cloud outage. So noticed that the websites had all gone completely down, got to the pub, and none of the card readers in the pub worked either. You can order a drink and pay by cards. And at that point, we sort of thought, this seems like a bit more of a widespread issue than something that is our fault. And of course, Discord at the same time had gone down, Spotify had gone down. You still need to respond to these sorts of problems and try and work out what the root cause is. But of course, if it's a cloud provider, there's not really a lot you can do apart from sit tight. And if it goes on for a day or so, maybe think about migrating some of your infrastructure to, I don't know, a competitor like AWS or something. There have been so many more outages that I can't remember. The clients I work with, the culture is very much, we're not going to blame anyone. We're going to think about the root cause and think about what we can put in place to prevent something like this happening again, which is exactly the sort of attitude that you want to have when things go wrong. So wider industry issues, we've had bugs in ticket issuing systems. So systems that forget how route and operator restrictions work and might sell you a TransPennine only ticket on an Avanti itinerary, which is an interesting one. Quite often you can get very, very good value tickets on, for instance, a slow West Midlands railway service. So when you've got a bug like this, you can suddenly save lots of money. And I mentioned the routing guide earlier. Because of how horrendously complicated it all is, it's very possible, you say it's very possible, I know there are loopholes that exist in the routing guide data that mean that you can travel on interesting routes that you wouldn't think might be valid on certain tickets and save lots of money as a result. And it's a cat and mouse game. People spot issues. There are changes made to the data. It's getting updated all the time to try and address them, and people continue finding issues. Journey planner bugs. So yeah, simple 8-mile trip getting converted into some ridiculous 300-mile route involving cycles. It's a fun way to explore the country if you can get a really cheap ticket sold with an itinerary like that. These are things that have all happened to retail sites that I've seen before over the years, and not something that many people talk about. So that is a whistle-stop tour of rail and some, I think, quite interesting issues that I've come across. I'm happy to open up to questions about anything related to rail, really, if anyone has any. Thank you very much.